You learned to read the room before you learned to read yourself. Silence became safety long before it became your personality. You do not talk much when something hurts. Even now, a part of you still believes speaking up might make everything worse. So you stay calm. You stay agreeable, useful, low maintenance, and easy to be around. People call you mature. They do not always see how much of that maturity was built from caution. Maybe you were the child who noticed tension before anyone named it. You knew when a door closed too hard and when dinner got unusually quiet. You learned that certain feelings made the room heavier, need too much, cry too long, ask the wrong question, and something in the house changed. Maybe nobody said, "Be quiet," but the message still landed in your body. It showed up in sighs, faces, long silences, and the look adults gave each other when you needed something inconvenient. Children understand more than people think. So you adapted beautifully. You became someone who could swallow words before they caused trouble. You got good at shrinking your reactions. You learned how to feel a feeling without letting it fully reach your face. That skill can look impressive in adulthood. It can look like self-control, patience, grace, and emotional stability. But sometimes it is not peace. Sometimes it is fear wearing very polished clothes. You might be the one who never starts conflict. You let the rude comment pass, then replay it alone for 3 hours. You might say, "It's fine," when it is clearly not fine. Not because you're dishonest, but because honesty still feels a little dangerous. When someone asks what you want, your mind goes strangely blank. Not because you have no preferences, but because you learn to scan for theirs first. When someone asks how you feel, you reach for the safest answer. Tired is easier than hurt, and stressed is easier than lonely. You may look independent on the outside, but underneath, there is often a deep caution around being emotionally visible. That caution did not come from nowhere. It usually grows in homes where emotional expression had consequences. Sometimes the consequence was anger. Sometimes it was ridicule, dismissal, or being told you were too sensitive. Sometimes it was subtler than that. You were not punished exactly, but you were left emotionally alone with what you felt. That kind of childhood teaches a very specific lesson. If your feelings make other people uncomfortable, keep them private. And children do not question survival lessons. They build themselves around them. So the quiet child often becomes the adult who can carry a lot without showing it. The adult who seems unbothered until they suddenly shut down. The hard part is that this pattern gets rewarded. Quiet children are called easy, and self-silencing adults are called strong. People praise how little you need. They admire how much you can handle without making a scene. But there is a hidden cost to becoming emotionally convenient. You start disappearing from your own life in small, socially acceptable ways. You apologize before asking for help. You rehearse texts for 10 minutes just to avoid sounding like a burden. You feel exhausted, then guilty for resting. Your body says stop, and your mind says not yet. You sit with hurt far longer than necessary because confrontation feels more dangerous than resentment. So you bleed quietly and call it patience. You are often the dependable one in every room. The one who remembers, anticipates, adjusts, and smooths things over. But being dependable can become a hiding place. If you are always useful, maybe nobody will notice how much care you need too. That is one of the saddest parts of this pattern. You become excellent at giving others the emotional safety you never got. You can sense tiny changes in tone. You notice the pause before someone pulls away, the glance that means they are irritated, the mood nobody else caught. It almost feels like intuition. Sometimes it is actually hypervigilance that got mistaken for wisdom. You became observant because it helped you stay ahead of discomfort. If you could predict the shift, maybe you could prevent the fallout. That is why some quiet people are not passive at all. They're intensely active on the inside. Their minds are constantly scanning, editing, softening, and calculating. What can I say? What should I hide? How do I keep this stable? And after years of that, silence stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like your nature. You may even pride yourself on being private, but privacy and self-erasure are not always the same thing. There is a difference between protecting your inner life and abandoning it. Many people who learn to stay quiet were never taught that difference. Sometimes the pattern begins with parentification. You were the child who became emotionally careful because adults around you were overwhelmed. Maybe you learned not to add to the load. You watched a tired mother, an explosive father, a depressed parent, or a household already full of stress. So you became easy to manage. You made yourself smaller than your actual age. Children in that position often look unusually mature. What people miss is that their maturity was built around suppression. You did not become calm because the world felt safe. You became calm because being expressive felt expensive. And it follows you into adult relationships. You tell yourself you are low drama, but underneath, you are bracing. You do not always say when something bothers you. You wait, hoping the feeling will shrink on its own. Sometimes it does not. It hardens instead. Then one small disappointment hits an old wound. Suddenly, the reaction feels larger than the moment, and you do not know how to explain why. This is what people often misunderstand about quiet people. Silence does not mean nothing is happening. It can mean too much is happening at once. It can mean the nervous system still links expression with risk. That is why you may freeze when you are put on the spot. Not because you have nothing to say, but because urgency shuts the door. That is why boundaries can make you feel guilty. A simple no can feel like a threat to connection. That is why kindness can make you suspicious. When care was inconsistent early on, receiving it can feel strangely unsafe. Someone offers help, and your first instinct is to decline. Someone is patient with your feelings, and part of you waits for the cost. You may crave closeness and still pull back from it. You want to be known, but not exposed. That conflict is exhausting. It creates people who seem emotionally composed while feeling deeply alone. And loneliness in this pattern is rarely loud. It is not always dramatic or obvious. It can look like functioning well all day and feeling empty at night. It can look like answering everyone and still feeling unseen. It can look like being loved by good people and not fully trusting the love, because some part of you still thinks visibility leads to vulnerability without protection. So you stay measured. You share enough to seem open, but not enough to feel held. This is where many adults get confused about themselves. They think they are just introverted, just private, just independent. Sometimes that is true, but sometimes those words hide an old adaptation. Real privacy feels chosen. Defensive silence feels automatic. Real independence has room for support. Survival independence feels ashamed of needing any. And that shame runs deep. Not loud shame, but the quiet kind. The kind that says, do not make this about you. The kind that makes your needs feel embarrassing the moment they become visible. So you minimize. You say, it's not a big deal, even when it keeps you up at night. You laugh while telling a story that actually hurt you. You translate pain into something more acceptable. This often starts young. A child sees which emotions get welcomed and which ones get shut down. Joy might be tolerated. Achievement, it might be praised. But sadness, anger, fear, and disappointment may receive discomfort instead of care. So the child becomes selective. They bring home the acceptable self and hide the rest. Years later, that person may struggle to know what they really feel in real time. They only understand it later, alone, in fragments. They may need hours after a conversation to realize they were hurt. By then, the moment to speak has passed. This delayed self-awareness is not immaturity. It is what happens when a person gets trained to bypass themselves. You cannot easily name feelings you had to outrun. You cannot instantly access needs you were taught to override. And still, the world often rewards the override. Quiet people get promoted for being steady. They become the friend who never asks for too much, the partner who absorbs tension without making a mess. But absorption is not the same as resilience. Being able to carry pain silently does not mean it weighs less. In fact, silence often makes pain heavier. It keeps experience from being witnessed, organized, and metabolized. What is never spoken tends to settle in the body. Tight jaw, shallow breathing, stomach knots, sudden fatigue, headaches with no clear story. The body often says what the mouth had to suppress. It keeps the score in quieter ways. That is why some people feel tired around simple emotional tasks. Sending the honest text can feel harder than finishing actual work. Crying in front of someone can feel more exposing than failing in public. Rest can feel undeserved unless everything is already handled. Because at the core of this pattern is not just silence, it is conditional safety. I am safe if I am easy. I am safe if I am useful. I am safe if I do not need much. The tragedy is that these rules can create a very lovable adult who still feels fundamentally hard to love. Not because they are hard to love, but because they learn to hide the places love was needed most. And eventually the strategy starts cracking, usually not all at once. Maybe you become resentful in relationships that look fine from the outside. Maybe you feel strangely numb during milestones you thought would finally make you happy. Maybe you had a season where being strong stops feeling noble and starts feeling lonely. That is often the moment the old pattern becomes visible. Not because you were breaking, because something honest is finally refusing to stay buried. There is an important reframe here. Staying quiet was not weakness, and it was not failure. It wasn't a slap, intelligence, shaped by environment. It was adaptation in a place where full expression did not feel safe enough. The problem is not who you had to become. The problem is carrying that version of you into rooms where it is no longer required. What protected you at 10 may isolate you at 30. What kept peace in one house may keep distance in every relationship. And that can be painful to admit, especially if being the quiet one became part of your identity. Because then speaking up does not just feel uncomfortable, it can feel like betraying the self that got you through. But growth often begins there, not in becoming loud, dramatic, or endlessly expressive. Just in telling the truth a little sooner. Just in letting your inner life take up a little more space. Maybe that means saying, "That bothered me," before resentment turns into distance. Maybe it means not explaining your boundary like an apology letter. Maybe it means noticing when you call yourself low maintenance. Sometimes that phrase hides a history of unmet needs. Maybe it means receiving care without rushing to earn it back. Letting kindness land can be its own form of courage. Maybe it means asking yourself a harder question. If I were not busy staying easy to love, what would I finally say? That question can be disorienting. It can also be life-changing. Because beneath the quiet is usually not emptiness. It is a full person who learned carefulness before freedom. A person with anger they were never allowed to trust. Tenderness they learned to protect. Needs they kept translating into silence. And none of that makes you broken. It makes you understandable. You were shaped by what your nervous system had to believe. You were shaped by rooms that taught caution more clearly than comfort. So if you still go quiet when you're hurt, there is a reason. If you still freeze when asked what you need, there is a reason. If receiving love feels harder than giving it, there is a reason. Your patterns are not random flaws. They are old strategies with excellent memory. They learned their job well. But you are allowed to outgrow a strategy without insulting the child who built it. You are allowed to become safer to yourself now. And maybe that is the deepest truth here. Some people did not become quiet because they had nothing to say. They became quiet because their inner world once had no safe place to land. So they held it alone and held it for years. If that is your story, your silence was never proof that you felt less. It was proof that you learned early how much feelings could cost. And the real work now is not becoming someone else entirely. It is learning that your voice does not have to arrive perfectly to deserve space. You do not have to earn softness by disappearing first. You do not have to stay unreadable to stay safe. Sometimes the most powerful thing a quiet person learns is this: peace is not the same as self-abandonment. And finally, feeling safe may look less like becoming silent again. It may look like speaking without expecting punishment.